Okay, so in this photo tutorial, I'm going to demonstrate how to set up a Photoshop document for the photo series project. I've already taken some photos. They're actually here in this photo series folder. I open up that. There's 3 photos here that I've already edited that I'm going to use for this project. But what I want to do is demonstrate how to set up the blank canvas in Photoshop that we can put those photos in. So the first thing we're going to need to do is make a new document in Photoshop. So under the File menu, so we go to Photoshop, under the File menu, go to File, New, and you're going to get a dialog box here that has a lot of information in it. We want to title our file, so we're just going to call this Photo Series 1. Then your width and height, this is important. You want your width to be 14.5 inches. Make sure that is set for inches, and your height is at 5. Also, your resolution should always be 300. Color mode can stay RGB. That should just default, so that should be fine. So your width, your height, and your resolution, you want to make sure you're checking those. Hit OK, and what you should see is a blank document that looks very much like this. It's going to be long and skinny rectangle. Now what we want to do with this document is we want to divide it up into 3 equal sections so we can drop our photos in. So in order to do that, we're going to use the guidelines. So to use the guides, we need to get the rulers visible. As you can see, there's no rulers on this workspace here. So if you go under the View menu and go down to Rulers and just click that, you can now see the rulers pop up. So with the rulers, we're going to start drawing some guides. So if you watch my cursor, I'm just going to take my cursor and put it right over top of this ruler. And as you see, as it goes over the ruler, it turns into an arrow. So there you see the crosshair, it turns into the arrow. So once you have the arrow tool, I'm just going to click and drag with my mouse. And as I click and drag onto the canvas, you can see it's pulling a guide. And then you can also see the X coordinate there. As I move it along, the X coordinate changes. So we want this first guide to be placed at 0.5 inches, which is right about here. I can't get it exact, but I'm going to just drop it in there. It's 0.504. That's going to be close enough. So that's our first guide. We're going to come back to the left, click and drag a second guide, and this one's going to be dropped in at 14 inches, which means it is a ½ inch from the edge. And then we're going to do the same thing with the top. Click and drag down 0.5. And one more at 4.5. Now, as you can see, again, I can't get these guides exactly, but one quick fix is if you zoom in, if I take my zoom tool and zoom in once or twice, if I get closer to my document, go back to my move tool here, I can take this guide and I can move it. So if I drop it in the wrong spot, I can always move it, and I can get it much more precise now once I zoom in. So if I want to get this guide on exactly 0.5 inches, I can do that by zooming in. All right, let's go ahead and zoom out so we can see the whole document. So here what we have is a ½ inch border, and now what we want to do is divide this internal rectangle into 3 equal squares with a ½ inch in between. Each square is going to be 4 inches by 4 inches. So if our whole document, it should make sense because our whole document is 5 minus a ½ inch at the top minus a ½ inch at the bottom, which gives us 4 inches high, which means our image will be 4 inches wide. So we'll go back to the left-hand side, grab another guide, and since the beginning of our square starts at 0.5, that means the end of our square will be 4.5 right here. So now we have a 4 inch by 4 inch square. Come back to the left again, drag another guide, drop it in at 5 inches. There's our ½ inch divider. And we drop it in at 9. Close enough. And then lastly, 9.5. And so what we should end up with is a Photoshop document that has 3 equal squares divided into or 3 equal squares that are 4 by 4 each. Okay, let's go ahead and save this. Make sure we save our work. We call it a Photo Series PSD. You want to make sure you do select your folder. So right here where it says where you want to navigate to your Photoshop, or excuse me, your photography folder, I'm just going to put mine on my desktop right now because I don't have access to my folder, but I'm going to go ahead and save it. But do make sure you save it to your photography folder in the right place. All right, the next step then is to import our edited Photoshop files into these three squares. So I'm going to keep this document open, and I'm going to open a second document. File, open. And in my photo series, I have a camera, a film roll, and a picture. I'm going to start with the camera. Go ahead and open that. Okay, so here's my camera. Get rid of these guides for a second. Here's my camera, and as you can see from the layers palette, I've already done some editing. If I turn off the levels and the black and white, this was my original shot, and I did some basic editing here to turn it black and white, and then I saved that as a PSD. So I want to basically move this photo into the photo series document that we just created. Now there's a couple ways you can do it, but the way I've found is to just use a few of the menu options here in Photoshop to duplicate. So we're going to go under Image, and we're going to duplicate this image. But the problem is right now, if I duplicated this image, I would only be duplicating this layer. I don't want to just duplicate the layer. I want to duplicate everything that's in the content. So before I go into Image Duplicate, I want to flatten the entire file, and that's going to just be temporary, but I want to flatten this file. So I'm going to go under Layer, and then all the way at the bottom, I'm going to go to Flatten Image. So Layer, Flatten Image, and as you can see over here, it's flattened my layers into one layer. Now I'm going to go back to Layer again and go to Duplicate Layer. So under the same menu, I can flatten the image all the way at the bottom, and then once it's flattened, I can duplicate. Choose that. Now, you're going to get a dialog box here. First of all, it's going to ask you, what do you want to call this new duplicated image? I don't want to just call it background copy because that doesn't make any sense. I'll call it camera. And secondly, you want to change the destination. Right now, the document destination is just within itself. It's saying, copy this within the camera document. I don't want to do that. So I'm going to select that, and because I had the photo series document open, it now gives me that as an option to move it to it. So I'm going to go to Document, Photo Series, and hit OK. So nothing's really changed here, but if I go back to my tab and go to the photo series, you now see that the layer, the camera layer, has been copied over here. Okay, so we've now copied that image. Now I want to do that same step with the other two images, but before I do that, I want to take this image and I want to get it to fit in this little square. Okay, so here's our camera layer. As you can see, it's kind of its own floating layer here, but it's obviously much too large to fit into this square, so we need to reduce it down. So in order to take an image or take a layer in Photoshop and reduce it, we're going to do what's called a transform. So we go into the Edit menu and come down here to Transform. Now under the Transform option, you have a lot of different options here: scale, rotate, skew, all kinds of cool things. But all we really need to do is scale it. So if I select Scale, you can see it puts what's called a bounding box around my layer. And that bounding box is basically showing the borders, how big my actual file is. So I want to take this layer and shrink it down to fit inside this square. Now be careful, if you just grab a corner and start scaling it, I can scale it down, but I could also scale it way out of proportion. And you don't want to do that. You want to keep things in proportion. So let me click off of that and say Don't Apply. If I go under Edit, Transform, Scale again, I'm going to hold the Shift key. And as I'm holding the Shift key and then scaling it, that allows me to keep it in proportion. So no matter, as you can see, no matter where I move my mouse, it's constantly keeping the image in proportion. Again, that's holding Shift. So I scale it down, I move it around. Here you can see I've made it too small. It's not fitting inside the square, so I'm going to grab that corner. Again, holding Shift, pull it back out. And I'm just going to pull it until I like the way the camera fits. Now, obviously, the photo is a rectangle, the original photo. The space that I'm putting it in is a square, so it's going to get cropped out. That's just that's just the way we set up our document. So just be aware that part of your photo will get cropped out because you're trying to fit a rectangle into a square. So, okay, we've scaled it. again, what I'm looking at is just what fits inside of this box here, this internal box. That's the only part of the photo that I'm worried about. I'm happy with the way it looks, so I'm going to hit the return key to apply. There's also a little plus or a little check mark that shows up here. See some people use that too, but it does the same thing. It just applies the scale to the image. And the last step I need to do here is basically hide the parts of the photo that I don't want to see, these parts here that are outside the box. So I don't necessarily want to delete that part. I don't want to like cut it off, but what I want to do is hide it. So I'm going to use something that's called a layer mask. So here we come over to, again, the layers palette. We're on the camera layer. And if we come down here, there's some buttons down here in the bottom of the layers palette. And there's a button that kind of looks like a Japanese flag. It's the best way I can describe it. It's got a circle inside of a rectangle. That's the button we're going to use. Okay, that creates a layer mask. But before we click that button, we need to tell Photoshop what part of the photo we want to keep and what part we want to mask. So back up here to my tools palette, I'm going to select the rectangular marquee tool. It's right here, it's right above the lasso tool. And I'm going to take that rectangle marquee tool and make a selection of the square. I've just basically clicked edge to edge with my mouse and I made a selection of the internal square. Excuse me. So now Photoshop knows that that's the part of the photo that I want to keep. So with that area selected, I come back to my layers palette, click on my layer mask, and as you see, the rest of the photo has disappeared. It's not cut off, it wasn't deleted, it's just hidden underneath the mask. And I know that because if I come back to my layers palette, I now have this layer mask that's visible. Here's my image of my camera, and in between these two I have a chain link. If I unlink that chain and click on the camera itself, I'm going to select my move tool here, I can actually take this camera image now and I can move it within the mask. As you can see, the camera's still there, it's just hiding underneath the mask that was created. So the nice thing about that mask is once you create it, you can actually move your photo around a little bit more. You can kind of tweak it to get it right where you want it. Rather than having to delete parts of the photo, you just kind of mask it. Okay? So that's the first image. Then I'm going to basically do the same thing with the next two. I'm going to go File, Open. I'm going to choose the film roll. Here's my film roll. Again, it's been edited as you can see in the layers palette. There's a level, there's a black and white. Go back under the layer menu, flatten image, layer, duplicate layer, change the name, change the document destination, and hit OK. Click back to my photo series. Here's our film. Again, we're going to scale it down, edit, transform, scale, holding the Shift key, excuse me, keeping it in proportion, and we fit it into the frame. Hit return to apply. Take our rectangular marquee tool, select the space that we want visible, and then in the layers palette, select our layer mask. And there we have our second image. And then of course I would do that same process for the third image. So that's setting up a photo series document for 3 images. If you were interested in adding additional images, that can definitely be done. This photo series is obviously set up just for 3, but if you wanted to do more than 3, say you wanted to do 2 rows, like 6, 1, 2, 3 here, 1, 2, 3 at the bottom, that's just a matter of increasing your canvas size. So with this document, if I wanted to add more space, I could go under Image, Canvas Size, and instead of 5 inches high, I would want to double that height to 10. And here, if you see there's an area called Anchor, basically I want to add those 5 inches to the bottom of this current document. So that means I'm going to anchor my document towards the top, so all the space is added to the bottom. Hit OK. Oops. That actually turned black accidentally because I had my colors switched here. So I'm going to undo that, flip my colors, image, canvas size. Try that one more time. Move the anchor, hit OK. So So now you can see I have twice as much canvas space under here. So I would just draw some additional guidelines, 5.5 inch apart, and that allows me to space to do 3 more images along the bottom. So it's just some simple math to add additional pieces in if you so choose. Once that's all set up, make sure you do save. Okay. And one other word of caution here. Notice I do still have the other 2 images, the camera and the film roll. I have those still open. I'm going to go ahead and close those documents. Now, it's asking me if I want to save this document. And if you think about the last action that you did on this file, was we flattened the image. That was just temporary. We just flattened it just so we could duplicate it over. I don't want to flatten it. I don't want to save the flattened version. So I'm going to say don't save because I already had this saved from before. So just remember that when this prompts you to save, if you flatten the image, say don't save because that was just a temporary action. Same with the film roll. It's been flattened. So I don't want to save that. And we come back to our document. And that's how to set up a photo series.